Have you ever wondered what's in common between GTA and Dark Souls? Well, at first glance there is nothing common between those two. First game is a title telling a tale of hard LA life with gangsters and all that stuff. Second game is a Japanese samurai simulator. But with me being primarily Souls YouTuber, I couldn't help but notice a couple of similarities that would make anyone uncomfortable. What if it's all a big conspiracy? What if Miyazaki has secretly helped Rockstar to design GTA 5? Because if it's not the case, then GTA 5 is a blatant Dark Souls ripoff. I know right now you don't even believe a single word I've said, you think I'm crazy, but hear me out. First of all, both games are in third person, which is obviously, I know, a small thing, but it all adds up. Both games feature a steep learning curve. In Dark Souls you have to study the environment to be able to navigate and solve the level. In GTA you have to play a mission a couple of times to know where the enemy spawns, so you don't get caught off guard. Pretty similar, right? But it doesn't end here. Both games can be considered somewhat challenging, and both games have harsh penalties for dying. When you die in Dark Souls, you respawn at the bonfire, and you are forced to clear the level past it once more. The exact same thing happens in GTA. If you die during the mission, you respawn at the hospital, which is, as you could have guessed, GTA equivalent of bonfire, and you're forced to redo the whole damn mission again. Both games feature health bar and stamina bar, even though it is hidden in GTA 5. Anyone who has ever played it for more than 5 minutes knows that there is a stamina modifier that governs how long you can sprint. The similarities don't end here. Remember how everyone praised the freedom of Dark Souls 1 open world kind of thing? Well, GTA 5 beats the original when it comes to that, because it does feature an actual open world, where you can go wherever you want and partake in any kind of mission. As I mentioned earlier, both games have a harsh penalty for dying. For example, in Dark Souls, whenever you die you lose your souls and you are forced to collect them upon respawn. The very same concept applies to GTA as well. Whenever you die in GTA, drop some of your cash, which is just like souls, a kind of currency. And when you respawn at the hospital, a small fee is taken as a penalty for dying. Both games allow you to spend the currency leveling up your stats. In case of Dark Souls, it's a very simple process. You just rest at the bonfire and select what stats you want to level. When it comes to GTA, it has a fun minigame attached to it. You can choose a kind of activity and pay for it using the in-game currency. Performing this activity repeatedly will increase your stats. So if you want to level strength in Dark Souls, you just do it at the bonfire. However, with GTA being a very progressive Dark Souls clone, there is a cool minigame attached to it, where you have to play tennis or golf to level up your stats. Both games allow you to spend currency on armor and clothing and weaponry and all that stuff, with the only difference being that in case of Dark Souls, it's a bunch of swords, and in case of GTA, we're talking about rifles. And no, it does not even remotely start to end here. For example, both games allow you to customize your character. Dark Souls offers you a character creator at the start of the game, and GTA offers you a bunch of beards and hairstyles to have fun with. Both games were released on console first. Both games are meant to be played with a controller. Both games have PvP. Both games allow you to save the progress, and the list goes on. So, you wanna hear my final verdict? GTA 5, without a single doubt, is a blatant Dark Souls ripoff. But wait, there's more. CSGO is a Dark Souls clone as well, because both games feature permadeath and have a high skill ceiling.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more!
Now seriously, it's time to stop. For some unapparent reason, people are going crazy these days over Dark Souls formula, calling any kind of game with a similar set of features a clone. That's not how it works, no. You can't just pick a bunch of features of your favorite game and make a comparison based on it, because if you do so, you'll end up with a wild conclusion, just like the one I've jokingly made earlier about GTA being Dark Souls clone. I mean, it does sound reasonable to an extent, but it isn't. It doesn't work like that. And even if it did work like that, Dark Souls is not the first game to pull that kind of a core concept. If you're an old-timer like me, you probably remember that ancient game called Castlevania, the Symphony of the Night. I can't help but praise this game because I love it so much. But the point is, it's super high up in my book for the exact same reason why System Shock is super high up in my book. Both of those games gave a birth to a whole new generation of games with a similar core concept. And if something, Dark Souls itself is a Castlevania clone, but not because those two share some odd similarities similar feature. It's because the core concept is actually the same. There is not a single person I know who has played both Castlevania and Dark Souls and didn't mention how they're basically the same game in a different format. Yep, Dark Souls is a 3D Castlevania. Everything from how the world is built and how progression is set up to small details of how the loot works is shared between those two games. Now obviously it isn't a blatant ripoff, but it's safe to say that Castlevania has inspired Miyazaki to get Dark Souls going. And there's nothing to be ashamed of really. When you take the core concept of one game and present your take on it, it's fine. But the core concept is not pseudo-hardcore difficulty, it's not permadeath element, it's a lot more than that. As someone who has enjoyed Nioh a lot, it pisses me off so damn much when people call it Dark Souls clone. Because concept-wise, it is much more similar to a game like Diablo. Sure, it does feature some systems and mechanics that were inspired by Dark Souls, like for example bloody grave things being Nioh's bloodstains. But Nioh is primarily a loot-based game, where you can outlevel and outgear every enemy or boss. It is built upon randomized loot system and endless grind. There is nothing really similar concept-wise between Dark Souls and Nioh. So no, just because both games feature stamina system doesn't mean that those games are similar. People really need to stop. Not every third-person RPG where you play as some odd knight in armor with a sword is a Dark Souls clone, because it isn't really what defines Dark Souls, at least to people that were born before smartphone. Hell, even go further, the permadeath element does not define series either. We had a billion of roguelike games before Dark Souls, all featuring the hardcore difficulty, permadeath, and all the jazz. So if you want to be smart, you can say that Binding of Isaac is Dark Souls clone, or actually, it's the other way around, because if my memory serves me right, Isaac was released earlier than Dark Souls outside of Japan. But even then, it's not a clone, just because they share a couple of features. Video games are complex. You can't just break a formula into multiple tiny elements and compare games bit by bit till you somehow end up with a conclusion that they're half similar. You can partake in any kind of mental gymnastics, but it wouldn't matter. You can't call something Dark Souls clone until it actually tries to imitate the set of features that make Dark Souls unique. No, your favorite Crash Bandicoot is not like Dark Souls, just because you can't clear a level without dying, because it's not what defines Dark Souls game. Plenty of those features that crazy people tend to use nowadays to describe how something is a Souls clone are not even exclusive to Dark Souls. There have been plenty of games with non-linear progression, level up systems where you decide which one to level up, and cool Dark Souls-esque puzzles and bosses, all even before Dark Souls. With that being said, outside of this whole, oh my god, it's so like Dark Souls kind of thing, this whole line of thinking is very stupid, because it makes it seem like every single shooter that has been released past 1994 is a Doom clone, because, you know, you get a gun and you shoot enemies. To summarize this whole rant affair, I have to say that nothing is a Dark Souls clone until it actually tries to imitate it, by copying its core concept and good chunk of its features. Outside of that, you can't really compare two video games based on a couple of odd features, especially since those features are rarely exclusive to the title. There's always something unique about a good video game. In case of Dark Souls, I'm inclined to say that it's the atmosphere, because everything else is not really new. Then again, I find it somewhat hard to blame people for going crazy about it. The thing is, Dark Souls is probably the most popular game right now that pushes those ideas to the public, so it is very natural that it's the first kind of a roguelike game for plenty of people. But calling everything that shares the same core concept a clone is stupid, because Dark Souls, as I've explained earlier, is not the first kind of a game based around that jazz. On top of that, calling every other game that has a similar feature to a Souls clone is just crazy. Maybe you can compare the way those features are implemented, but it's far from normal to imply that just because Nioh has katanas and stamina management system, it's a Dark Souls clone. And yes, I know the developers did admit Dark Souls influence, but they also did admit Diablo influence, implying that it had far greater impact. But now I'm talking about Nioh, which is a topic for a whole nother video. Anyway, to sum up the summary, Dark Souls isn't defined by its difficulty or harsh death penalties, it's far more complex than that. I hope I made it clear that neither of those features were pioneered by Dark Souls, and if something, as I mentioned earlier, my experience suggests that all of the charisma of the series lies in its atmosphere, which sadly nobody even tried to copy. So if you want to make a fair comparison, consider the game for what it is, without breaking it into 10 tiny less relevant features that the industry has been abusing for the past 20 years and calling it a day. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.